So good evening, everyone, and welcome to another RTE School of Media Leadership panel. This one is obviously on technology, and thank you all for coming out this evening. Before we get all into, I'll introduce all the members in just a few moments, but before we do that, I'd like to introduce you to Charles Falzon, who is the chair of RTA, who just has a couple of opening words. Charles, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm glad you came, because if you didn't, then it would be really dull here. We have a smallish turnout, but an important turnout, and I understand how busy it is right now with all the projects going on and the year end of term and everything. But I really think you're in for a treat tonight. As you all know, RTA is spending a lot of energy being at the crossroads of technology and content. It is about creativity, meeting innovation, meeting technology, and creating a narrative for media in the 21st century. And we see that in many ways. We see that in the projects of our students. We see that in the research of our faculty. We also see that in innovations we've had, like the Transmedia Center, which is just down the hall. If you haven't seen it, just drop by. It's an area where an ideation lab, really, and an innovation lab for people to do nothing but think about the future of content and applying new technology. But one of the main ways we do that is by having the leadership of our faculty and our alumni in their work as well. Two faculty members who are co-hosting this evening are among the best in their field. Dana Lee, who just introduced me, I'll introduce him back, has been in the business for 30 years. He is an RTA grad of, what year was that, 79?
1977.
77.
Yeah.
And is our professor of media technical theory. He literally wrote the textbook on it. He is the one who's been taking technical theory and making it exciting, accessible, and positioning it as a tool for creativity. Because Dana's a creative person, also loves technology, and also always one step ahead of the game and seeing where it goes. And his enthusiasm has been addictive in terms of the students. So it's great to have Dana in this role tonight. The other individual is Hossein Rahnama, who again many of you will know, who we're also thrilled to have as a faculty member at RTA. He wears a lot of hats. In addition to being a professor of digital media and within RTA, he is the director of research and innovation at the Digital Media Zone. And he's also the CEO of Flybits, which is a company that focuses on context-aware computing. And Hossein has been already in the what has it been, a year or so that we've been working together since he's become faculty, a vital person and within RTA to say, okay, I get it. You're about content, and we bring computer science and technology and planning, and it's not the technology only, it's what you do with it. And so Hossein's been a real leader in helping RTA go the next level in its research and development. So enjoy the evening, and please join me, first of all, in a round of applause for Hossein and for Dana.
Thanks very much, Charles. Okay, so as long as we're introducing people, I'm going to continue along and introduce our panelists who are along this other couch. We gave them the big sofa over there. We get the smaller sofa here. Working my way directly, the closest one to me is Jonathan Ingham. He's a grad from RTA of 2009, and he's the president of Phosphorus Media. And you're going to hear all these folks talk about their specialties in just a moment. Moving just over to your right of Jonathan is Carrie-Ann Bissonnette. She's a grad from RTA 2003, and she's currently the manager of the Digital Media Zone here at Ryerson. And on the far end there, we've got Jaime Heinke, and she right now is, she's an RTA grad, by the way, of 2005. She's currently the National Marketing Manager for the National Speakers Bureau, but before then, she is a former interactive producer of the Media Innovation Group at CBC, and she's going to talk about some of the cool things that she was doing over there as well. So that's the gang of us. That's who are going to talk to you tonight, and I want this to be interactive. I'm going to get questions from you as well. And to that end, I'd like to address there's going to be two ways that you can interact with us tonight. If you've got a phone with you, that's probably most of you. please tweet us. We've got a Twitter wall up here. Tweet us at RTA Leads with your questions or comments, and we'll interact with that. I'm going to try and follow along on my iPad with that feed as well, so I've got a separate screen version over here as well. So that's one way of doing it. The other thing is that we've got 2 roaming microphones here tonight. So if you have a comment or a question at any point, just raise your hand, and our microphone runner people will be running around. There they are. On that side, there's one on each side. And they'll run around and find you. And that way we can hear your question clearly, because as you've probably noticed, this evening's proceedings are being recorded for archive purposes. Eventually we're going to clean this up and edit it down and put it on a server so everybody can get at it and watch it again and again and again. So we want to make sure that we hear your questions and comments clearly. So please wait till there's a microphone in front of you if you have a question or comment directly. But by all means, tweet along with us as we go through the evening as well. So that's how the process works. Let's see, I'm going to start it off, I guess, really, and we're all going to take turns and work our way sort of across the sofa to a certain extent. And the way this panel got started, the way we got thinking about this is the way of thinking of how programs, how content is produced is changing dramatically. And me being the media technical theory guy that Charles mentioned, I teach a lot about the history of things and how we got to where we are today in terms of technology. So if you think back, and some of you in the crowd do remember when it was very much like this, our industry has been traditionally kind of divided into 2 camps, what I guess I would call the creatives and the technologists, for lack of a better turn of phrase. And if someone in the creative side of things came up with an idea, they would develop it with their creative team, formulate their ideas, and once all the paperwork was done, they would then contact the people who had the technology, and then they would contribute their skills and equipment to make this happen. Now, there were actually very, very good reasons to do it that way. One of the biggest reasons was the technology was extraordinarily expensive. It wasn't cheap. It was difficult to maintain, and you needed experts who were able to work with that somewhat cantankerous equipment. To use a really obvious example, the first videotape machine was invented in 1956. And that videotape machine at the time cost $50,000. It doesn't sound like a lot of money, but in 2013 dollars, that's over $400,000. That's for one video recording device. So you can imagine that's not something that you bought a lot of, and you obviously needed someone who could maintain it and take care of it very carefully. So the technologist kind of had a full-time job, and that was sort of to take care of all that equipment and make sure it all ran for making the creative productions that we made. I'm using television as an example, but audio had kind of the same condition sets. Reel-to-reel machines were cantankerous, and you needed people who could take care of them, engineers to fix them a lot more, and so on. And I mean, really, when you think about it, I suppose that the people on the creative side had their rather primitive tools as well. They had, pens and paper and typewriters, and frankly, not much else. I mean, there weren't even word processors at one point. So we all had these primitive tools, and we kind of kept in our separate camps. In short, the content was created in one group, and the other group kind of facilitated it and made it happen. The last thing I want to mention in terms of the history is that the only people who made creative content, be it television or audio content or anything like that back then, was a pretty elite group of people who basically had deep pockets that were able to buy all this equipment and actually pay for the people to operate it and do all that kind of work. So the kind of content we had was basically fed to us one way, and it wasn't really much of a two-way street. And as we all know, that has changed dramatically over a rather short period of time when you think about the history of content creation and storytelling and the way we think of it. Obviously now, you are all very well aware of what the changes are that we have now. The tools are now much more sophisticated. They're obviously a lot cheaper. They don't cost $400,000 anymore. And the topic tonight, therefore, is technology leadership. Now, what we mean by that, or what we are trying to define that as, is that the technology, the tool makers, the tool designers and developers, and we're going to hear much more about that in a few minutes, are now an equal leader. They're an equal partner with the people who are creating content from the get-go. That process, that design work, is now part of the creative process right off the beginning. Everyone's at the creative table from the beginning, and that is a dramatic change from decades that have gone before us. And what that actually means and how it affects the way we create new content is something that we're going to discuss here tonight. I don't know whether we're going to have a lot of answers. We may end up with more questions than answers, perhaps, because this is a developing, burgeoning thing as we go along. One of the reasons that we put together this panel tonight especially is that RTA, frankly, is a leader in this sort of thing. Our students right now are working on projects where both sides of the table, if I can put that, are at the table from the get-go. We've got students who are technological specialists, people who do design and development work. They're right at the very beginning of creating the storytelling that we do today coming out of our students, especially our senior students. So we think that we're doing that with traditional media, Like I'd stay traditional in terms of standard audio and video type production. New media, experiential media, even consumer tools and end solutions. So even the stuff that a consumer would use at the end is what we're doing here. So RTA is a big, real leader in that. Finally, I'm just going to wrap up with a couple of thoughts that this thing has been on my mind for a week. You know, like I can't sleep because I keep thinking of more and more things because it's such a big issue. Some questions that maybe we can try and answer over the course of the evening. I don't know whether we will or not, but it's some food for thought to think about. How does technology drive storytelling these days? How does the creative process adapt to having those technical people at the table? What does that do to the actual process of telling a story? It's a whole different mindset that's brought to the table from the get-go. This is a nagging question for those who are in the more traditional camp, if I can put it that way, and it's this. If you don't incorporate all these new technologies, what does that say or mean about your content? Is your media production now behind in the sense that the audience may not care about your content because it doesn't have all these bells and whistles and sophistication? So is that really relevant to your audience anymore? Maybe yes, maybe no, I'm not sure. Some other things, I guess, one last thing actually really is, and this hit me just this morning actually, are we as consumers maybe overstimulated by too much technology? You know, if I sat passively and watched a television show or listened to a radio broadcast, that was one thing. But now it's almost like the demand is made on me as an end consumer to use my iPad, to use my phone, to use all these extra tools, to tweet back to my show, to interact with it in all kinds of fascinating ways. And some say that this has led to a kind of a hyper consumer community that can't get enough, and we almost like have a attention deficit. We can't, you know, stick to one screen, we stick to many screens and jump from one place to another. So maybe this is something that we have to think about. Are we humans even designed to handle consuming storytelling content that way? So that's just something that sort of dawned on me this morning because I couldn't sleep and I got up bright and early. But anyway, those are just some thoughts to think about. And that's all I wanted you to listen to me about for the moment. I'm going to pass it on to Hossein because I just wanted to give you kind of a background of the way things were and the way things definitely are now to kind of get us all on the same page. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Hossein.
Yeah, thanks, Dana, and thanks to all of you for joining us. So I started at Ryerson back in 1999 in the Department of Computer Science. And in 2001, I had an opportunity to work as part of an initiative actually in the very same building and on the very same floor called the IBLL, or Interactive Broadcast Learning Lab. And that was probably one of the very, very early initiatives that became the seed for something that later on grew to labs, and then probably the culture translated into Digital Media Zone, which is a successful initiative at Ryerson now. What IBLL was that, and few of my colleagues from the IBLL time are here now, Manny, Bill, and Jeremy. And what they were doing was that they were bringing students from computer science in probably first year or second year of undergrad and made them work with students from RTA to build projects for the industry. So one of the very early projects that I worked on was for Global Television to build a mobile platform back then on Pocket PC devices as a second screen solution. And from back then, it became very apparent to me and few of my colleagues back then that, well, yes, we are building fantastic technology and algorithms, but media and probably these types of mediums such as mobile devices are the right way to communicate that effectively, especially with the mass audience. And from back then, again, we grew that with RTA. We built a bridge between computer science, and a key focus in our team became on a concept that we now call it context-aware computing. Like, how do you make information and content relevant for people, not just based on location, but based on a lot of contextual data surrounding them. So a key focus in our research group became simplification of a sophisticated technology that anyone can use irrespective of a vertical or sector that they are in. That became a technology that later on became a spin-off company from Ryerson University, and some of my colleagues are here and they can participate in our discussion. So the trend that we are seeing now is that the more you simplify the technology to make it seamless for the user, really focus on user experience, take care of all that complexity, which is usually being done by engineers, but work very effectively with people in the media sector, people with user experience background, and really build teams that are flat, that are de-siloed, that can allow them to bring it to the market effectively. The changes we are seeing, I can definitely comment on the curricular aspects of things, that when we started with Digital Media Zone, we really broke the silos. We really didn't care if someone is coming from RTA or from computer science, from electrical engineering, whether they are undergrad, grad, postdoc, or PhD. All of them were welcome to come and sit beside each other to build the next big thing. And Jonathan and Carrie-Ann can comment on that, because they were involved from the very early days of Digital Media Zone, that how that model enabled to bring technology closer to media. And instead of having a department focusing on computer science and another one focusing on fashion and another one focusing on RTA, it's just one unit, very agile unit, working effectively together, worrying about the needs of a customer. The other thing which we are realizing that my colleagues can comment on is that successful projects that we are seeing these days, especially from the Digital Media Zone, are projects that have three main pillars or attributes associated with them. They understand the context. Charles is a pioneer of building this new transmedia center at RTA that is about really providing relevant content to the user based on the medium and location and the context that they are in. Content is also very important, and of course the engineering aspect of that. And if you can bring those pillars together, bring some business acumen around that, you can see a lot of interesting products and projects going out there. Researchers can do their research, business people can do their work, but at the end they are bringing a collective experience to the market. An example of that is the company that Jonathan has been working on over the past few years, called Phosphorus Media. And he can probably comment on his experience on how that kind of de-siloed model at the Digital Media Zone helped him to bring technology closer to media and turn it into a successful company, which is getting a lot of traction now. So, Jonathan, back to you.
I started Phosphorus Media here at Radio and Television, and interned at several production companies, and it was a great experience because I quickly realized what I didn't want to do, and that's very important, is actually Xing off what you know you don't want to do. And quickly realized that, of course, the industry is based off of one, creating good content, and then getting some ad revenue around it. So I got interested in advertising and where that would go. And I was actually, when I first came to RTA, I was interested in a graduating company who started a company, and they created an out-of-home digital network called One Stop, who became very successful and actually sold their business. And they created a narrowcasting channel, so an out-of-home digital network where they controlled all the content, they could sell advertising revenue, and I was really interested in that type of model. But what really piqued my interest is out-of-home advertising is all based off of foot traffic. So how many people walk through the Eaton Center every day? How many people walk through Union Station? The big question is, how many people actually looked at the ad? And you can't actually tell that, you just have that one metric. So I was interested in developing an out-of-home interactive ad solution that you could tell those analytics for that data, and started working with cameras and doing interactive camera tracking techniques and creating content using projectors on floors and walls. And so I had a real need of contacting developers. So I actually just started banging on doors within RTA and saying, who do you know at computer science, and got connected with Hossein to try to break down those silos that we know that are in place today, and try to get people on board to help share this vision. And for me at the beginning, I had a very specific need. I had hardware, so projectors and a place to hang it, and I had a physical need, very different than still what people have today, which they can create applications on their laptop. So that's kind of how the Digital Media Zone was born, because I actually went to the president and said, listen, there's got to be a space on campus somewhere where I can house this projector. there's a lot of people here today who helped me greatly with getting more than just a 4-hour booking in the studio space, to be able to hang this, research it, create content for it, and more importantly, bring in potential customers to validate the idea. Like, if I did this for a temporary event, would you pay X amount of dollars? Can you see where this is going? If I had this in malls all across Ontario, would you buy time on this network? So I had a real physical need, and that's where the Digital Media Zone was born. And of course, I guess the space that Charles is trying to champion here at the RCC, which is a dedicated focus space where you can set something up and really research and develop it. So that spawned to doing a series of touchscreen applications, large format like 47-inch screens, doing iPhone applications and iPad applications, and really figuring out how to create tools out of technology into a variety of different spaces. We weren't inventing tablets, we weren't inventing large touchscreens, but how can you come up with a very interesting way of developing a piece of content that would solve a need or enhance an experience? And we started building a team that was kind of based off of 3 core people, and that's like a developer, a designer, and then an account manager who's doing the day-to-day follow-ups. And we would kind of move in pods of 3 for our little temporary projects. We currently do a lot of service-based work and developing products as we go along, but we've had a lot of fun creating new and interesting things, taking them to market or temporary events, seeing what hits or what doesn't, and then applying it to a broader scope. So hopefully that kind of answers a bit of the question. I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but that's kind of my experience, and met Carrie-Ann along the way of basically creating this space that we could work in a collaborative nature, where I needed somebody from computer science, I needed somebody from image arts. Is there a way where we can get a room, get these people together, and see what can happen? So that's what I'll throw to you and go from there.
Great transition. Where did you learn that skill?
Thank you.
So I'm Carrie-Ann. I'm the manager at the Digital Media Zone, and when I started studying in radio and television, we were splicing audio reel together with razor blades, and so it's been a very interesting transition over the course of the years to see. Maybe we were just learning that as a history tool, I'm hoping, but I hope they don't still do that. But it was really fascinating, because you never think of yourself as very old, and so to be able to kind of see that over the course of what I think is just a few years is really interesting to see that now we're interacting. And so I brought my father here this evening because he happened to be in town, and I was kind of explaining how, although the room might not have 175 people in it, there could be 300 people sending in questions through the Twitter feed, and that's just was unfathomable just a few years ago. And that's why it's fun at the Digital Media Zone, because you break down the walls. And our campaign this year for our 3rd anniversary literally was break down the walls. And so there's something to be said about that face-to-face and that interaction, that storytelling, that will never go away. That's part of human behavior. But the way that we infuse technology or use technology has really, really catapulted the ability and the messages that storytelling can have. Jaime, you had a good example earlier on when we were kind of chatting about this, about the difference between 9/11 and Arab Spring, and how the consumer or the participants or the viewers of these had completely different roles in each one of those scenarios. So back to the Digital Media Zone, and I want to touch on something you said, Jonathan, was how there's kind of 3 components. And we see this a lot, and Hossein, you talked about this as well. Any of the successful businesses that are incubating at the Digital Media Zone, or who have what we call graduated from the Digital Media Zone, often there's a business component. So you mentioned sales. So there's got to be some kind of business savviness. If you don't know how you're going to make your money, your business is not going to go anywhere. You have to have your user experience or your designer or your content creator, someone who knows how to craft something either visually appealing, something that the audience needs or wants to hear, wants to learn, whether it's product or service. And then you're going to have your technical guys. So Hossein, you mentioned your developers. So without those three key components, your stool won't stand up. Your stool will not have the three pillars that it needs to be solid, a solid foundation. And that's what we've really seen the Digital Media Zone be able to do, is bring all of those components together. So we've heard about breaking down silos, and we bring them together naturally and cohesively, and they start to do beautiful things together, and companies start to emerge. And what we've seen is companies that have had only two of the three or one of the three dissolve. And the beautiful thing about being at the Digital Media Zone is that you're amongst all those other experts from all of those other industries, and we're seeing more so than ever that if those companies dissolve, those individuals start to get together and form different companies. And that's why it's fascinating and beautiful for many of the stories that we're telling today. So that's a bit about where I fit into all of this. I feel more of I'm watching it happen, and so I can talk about those experiences more than the way you've actually lived it, if you will. So, and Jaime, you have a different experience altogether.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, Carrie and I know each other from the MBA program here. I did the MTI, I believe it's the Masters of Innovation in Technology, as buzzy as that sounds. But in real terms, it was about figuring out how to manage technology tools, because we realized that business, as you mentioned, has all of these different components. And in order to manage them properly in this digital revolution we all are experiencing, you have to learn how to manage technology. So back it up a little bit, it all started when I started plastering Absolute ads on my wall when I was a kid. And I realized that there was this machine called the media. Call it advertising, call it whatever you want. But it was out there, and it was all encompassing, and you didn't even know it was happening. If it was good advertising, you didn't know it was happening. And that's what kind of sparked my interest. And the only place I was ever going to go for undergrad was the RTA School of Media, formerly Radio and Television.
Sorry, I keep calling it that.
Well, because we're oldies who, and I actually came here in this room was where I heard of, found out, experienced September 11th. I was in this room. And that, as Carrie-Ann mentioned, was this one-way content cycle. It was the experience of having information told to us, waiting for the evening news for all of the wrap-ups, and then getting the morning paper the next day. Fast forward over to the Arab Spring, where we are all content creators. That was created by the people who were physically there, whose message would not have otherwise gotten out without those technology tools, which is just so fascinating and interesting in so many different ways. But for me, I kind of realized during my undergrad that this digital boat was going, and it was going whether I was on it or not, and I definitely wanted to be on it. So after I graduated from the undergrad, I did various contract positions in graphics, in art, things like that, and all the way up to a travel and tourism company that was dealing with rich media content. And I was a creative director there. Things were awesome, thought everything was great. And then I realized, there's more, and there's more out there. And I knew that the capacity to be a creative but also a business person was something that I wanted to achieve. So I went to apply to the MBA program, which is where Carrie and I met. And the opportunities there were amazing in terms of the networks you were able to make. The Digital Media Zone was just emerging at that time, which was super interesting. And I met a contact there who hired me for the Media Innovation Group at CBC, and I've got my expert developers from CBC here as well. And that was a really unique experience. The fact that a Media Innovation Group even existed at CBC was kind of unheard of. But it was completely necessary. With dwindling budgets, we had to figure out how to reach our massive distribution network, but do it in a cost-effective and efficient way. So it's really about finding opportunities to spread Canadian content, but also have a feedback loop for Canadians to have a platform to talk about anything that they wanted to talk about. One such example is the Live Right Now program. It's basically a digital-based program. It started in season 1 as a £1 million challenge. But then it was entirely digital. So what we did in season 1 and 2 was gamify things that you wouldn't necessarily think of gamifying, like getting healthy or feeding hungry families. So we created a native app that gamified those things and would reward people based on it with points and such, but had a real difference in that with every check-in, we fed a hungry family in need, to the point of 100,000 families we fed based on the user interaction and their feedback into this program. And it was all based on the technology. The content was there, but it was from our audience. It wasn't, I mean, we had content that we were delivering to them through other platforms that we had, but it was really about the audience. And it was actually nominated for a President's Award, which is a very big deal at CBC and Radio-Canada. And it was also an integration with Radio-Canada, which was one of the first, and hopefully one of many, where both platforms integrated, and we were able to give it both to the French and English audience. So it was a really exciting time and a really exciting place to be, and it was great to be at the forefront, especially with the Canadian broadcaster, being able to deliver Canadian content with Canadian voices being shown there. So that's a bit of my background that way, but I really relish, as I just mentioned, to have you guys contribute to this conversation. It's really not about what we have to say, but what we can say collectively. And that's really kind of the future of media. It's no longer a one-way content-driven monologue. This is now a conversation we're having. And that includes tweets, that includes, LinkedIn, any other kind of two-way feedback loops are incredibly important for the progression of our society. That sounds so grandiose, but but it really is. I mean, Dana, you posed the question about, is this too much? Is this overstimulation? But, they say, when will we integrate with technology? When are we going to become machines? But we already are machines. I don't leave home without this.
What are you saying, Jamie? I'm too tied to my technology? What is that?
Not too tied, but it's about integrating, and it's about bettering ourselves, bettering the people around us, creating a digital knowledge economy. It is no longer just about physical things anymore. We live in a digital world, and I think it's super exciting. And as you can tell, I get all excited about talking about it. So please do tweet and send your hashtag RTA Leads. Whoa, that got very loud. Hashtag RTE Leads, because I really want to hear about what you guys have to say.
Yeah, and if anyone has a question that they just want to talk directly, we've got our microphone people off in the corners as well. Listening to all of you talk, one of these things is something that struck me, and Carrie-Ann, actually, you said something about like we don't think of ourselves as being old. I'm sorry, I do think of myself as being old. I have to be honest, to a certain extent. And I think that's, but it's a key point. I mean, I can't just say, I'm 50 something. I don't have to think about this anymore. It's like, no, you can't. It's almost like I can't not involve myself with this. I mean, I'm in the storytelling business, of course. I got one of those advantages. But I find increasingly that people who are my age, like 50 something, I'll be honest, and probably not the people in this audience who tend to be fairly savvy and media savvy and tech savvy, but there's a whole group of people who are having problems operating a simple computer. And Hossein, you actually talked about this, making the technical tools easy to use as part of it. So we've all kind of hit on this thing, and that thought hit me. We're making it easier in the sense that, you have a screen which is fairly easy to operate, whether it's a phone or a pad like this. Like a swipe can mean many things, a pinch can mean many things, but I don't need to type. I mean, I'm sending text, I suppose I do, but in a lot of cases, if I'm just wanting to experience content, I don't have to do a whole lot with that machine. In terms of the developing things, when you were talking about that, Hossein, one thing, I went past, I saw this on my Facebook feed the other day, and I read this cool article about this $99 computer called Kano, I think it's pronounced that, K-A-N-O. And it's based on the Raspberry Pi, a little tiny mini computer, microcomputer you get for $35, and it's this little kit you put together. And the whole kit is like, I think it's $99 or $109. It comes with a keyboard, and it's got the Raspberry Pi, and it's got a couple of other things. And it's designed for kids to put together. Not designed for you and me, although, I mean, you're welcome to put one together, I'm sure.
Yeah. Maybe
but,
not as successfully as a kid would.
But yeah, well, this is it. The video was fascinating to watch, and I thought, this is exactly what you're talking about, is making these tools accessible. And here's kids on this video, and it's a Kickstarter thing, but they've kickstarted, like, they asked for $100,000. They're up to, like, close to $800,000 in the Kickstarter. The thing is taken off like crazy, and they still got 21 days left to go, so you want to give them some money, go ahead. But this thing is going crazy, and I just thought, that's what we need. something kids can play with this thing, like, and do all these cool experiments with it. They got a little programming language built into it. It's really easy to operate, and I think this is the next generation. So this is partly why I feel old. It's like because those kids who are like 9 years old building this thing and playing with it are going to create some fascinating content, and I'm using the word content and less the word storytelling. Although in fact, even if you make a computer programming, you're telling a story, whether it's a game, as you pointed out, Jaime, or something else. So I think we're on the cusp of something that we can almost barely grasp right now, if you want to be dramatic about it, because these new tools are coming out all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the great researchers that I follow, well, he passed away about 10 years ago. He was Mark Weiser, the chief scientist for Xerox Research Lab in Palo Alto. He has a famous quote saying, the best technology is a technology that you cannot see. The whole notion of ubiquitous technology, it's embedded in the environment. You can focus on the content and the experience rather than worrying about the technology. So a lot of the trends that we are seeing is that, think about the framework. Think about a framework that can bring the users on board so they can contribute to the growth of that platform rather than, asking them to explicitly generate content. I mean, if you go back 10 years ago, everything was about content creation on the web. Mm-hmm. Front page does this, Dreamweaver allows you to do that. MSN and Microsoft and Yahoo are all worried about generating the content. And now, going back to, let's say, 2004, 2005, with this notion of a Web 2.0, it all became about a framework. YouTube doesn't generate any content, but it simplifies the process of crowdsourcing and content creation in a way that the collective intelligence grows a platform that goes global. Same thing with Vimeo, Snapchat, all of that. They're not producing content, they're just enabling the content to be disseminated in a very effective way. An example that my colleagues are working on, an example of bringing technology closer to media, is a project that we started about 1.5 years ago called Comica. It is a sophisticated algorithm that is capturing data from your daily life and anonymizing the data so that your privacy is protected. But when you use this application, you can log in to a web page at the end of the day and you will see the comic strip of your daily life. They translate contextual elements into comic strips. The more you use this system, the comic strips are becoming more and more relevant. You can invite your friends to be part of those comics. You can decide to be part of a Garfield comic strip or Tintin or whatever, or you can create your own characters. But the process of simplifying that and making it relevant and understandable by the user and hide that complexity from the technology point of view are some of the things that we think can really generate a successful company or a successful product that have media, creative, business, and technology all embedded into that. And what would be great to hear, let's say, from Jonathan, we had this discussion before that, by you co-locating with people from, let's say, computer science, you're now working on projects that are growing, you have global traction, you can talk about Yahoo, but it's that kind of co-location and clearing the boundaries that are helping you to grow your business. If you can talk about the analytics examples or Metrolinks.
Sure. I think certainly I can talk about Yahoo, and I guess I can only talk about my specific scenarios and examples. So what's great about having a small little company is that you're able to move so quickly and be so nimble. And we did some work for a production company in New York who has some great clients, and it's actually one of our first big jobs doing this interactive runway. But she was doing the global sales conference for Yahoo, and 3 months before that, Marissa Mayer it was announced that she was going to be the CEO of Yahoo now. So this was a big deal, and in January in Las Vegas, they were having this global sales conference where 1,400 people were coming in attendance. And Marissa said to the production company, I really want this to be an interactive experience. I want to know what our employees are currently thinking, like what's the lay of the land at Yahoo right now? What do they think our business stands for? Where is it going? How do we make it interactive? And these are the questions that I get posed all the time. People don't know what they want, whether it's a touchscreen. They know they want a touchscreen, but what's going to be on it? What's it going to do? And that's my challenge. So we were thinking about it, and obviously for that instance, everybody's got a mobile phone in their pocket. So it's like, why don't we do something with their phone and create an application? And then we started thinking about the application logistics, and we were thinking, will people download the app in advance? Like, we actually didn't have that window. It was about 2.5, 3 weeks to launch where we got invited. We wouldn't be able to submit it in time, so we created this interesting URL, and it looked like a native smartphone application, but it wasn't. It was just like a website that was optimized for mobile phones. But the whole premise of it was, can we get the audience to interact, and can we kind of mine that data? So the speakers would pose a series of questions to the audience, and then on their phone they could vote either A, B, or C, and then in real time we would calculate that on a big projection screen, and we save that data. So for example, they would ask, where do you think Yahoo is focused on? Search, content, all ad revenue, whatever the question may be. And what was interesting is more often than not, the audience was getting the questions wrong. And these are 1,400 people, so at least this let Marissa and the executive team know the lay of the land, like, holy crap, 1,400 people of our sales team think we're going in this completely opposite direction. And then the second component was this ask a question feature where people could ask a question at any point throughout the conference, kind of like what we're doing here with tweets. But they would fill out this form, they would come to us backstage, we would sit with somebody from Yahoo, and we would push these questions to downstage monitors. So when Marissa Mayer was doing her presentation on search, we would feed her a little question, and let's say it was Dave or whoever it may be, he wants to know blah, blah, blah. She had the opportunity to take that question. Whether she did or not was completely up to her, but more often than not, she did take it because it was relevant, it was real time, and then all of a sudden there's this audience engagement factor. We saved all the questions for the 2 days, and there was 850 questions asked, and then Marissa Mayer personally followed up with all the questions to her staff the next day. So it's like, here's this big, CEO of a huge company trying to make, put everybody at ease. Nobody's getting fired. Like, we want to work together. And then you ask, like, how the heck do little Phosphorus Media in Toronto in the digital media zone create this app for Yahoo, this huge tech company who has tons of engineers? And it's because we could mobilize and pull it off in 3 weeks, and they couldn't, if you can believe. Like, we could just turn it out and make it happen. And that's been obviously a very exciting portion of what we do in the data aspect. And I think there's a question.
Oh. Oh, sure, absolutely.
It's always question time.
Anytime.
Just run a microphone out to you right now. There we go.
Hi, I'm Marie from RTA. I work in the office here. And my question is, obviously surveys have existed for a really long time, Jonathan. Like, that's not anything new.
Yeah.
But why do you think an app made this experience different as opposed to just sending out a survey to all their faculty months before she even joined, or anything, just doing a Survey Monkey, let's say, as opposed to having that app? Why do you think that was different?
Well, the app was just the real-time tool. That's what they really like, because ideas come into your head. You want to get it out as quickly as possible, and that's what the goal was. Is, of course, like, all the questions that could be asked or that were asked couldn't be answered, but they still want to know it, and they want to know it at the time of conversation or when they're actually posing it, and that's where the good ideas hit. So it was more about, I guess, collecting it in
Direct engagement.
The direct,
yeah.
exactly,
Well, I
the
think it's also
real-time
about
experience.
transparency, right? You think about moderation, and I know at CBC we had stringent moderation guides. But then I think maybe the participants would feel a bit more involved in that and feel that it wasn't as kind of moderated and maybe censored that way. So that if Marissa, felt that she would take a controversial question or whatever, maybe her handlers wouldn't have wanted her to take some kind of question like that. So I think maybe that would make a better connection with the audience that way, in terms of feeling like this is real time, this is actually happening, and there's no time to kind of fluff it or have a PR department go over it or anything like that, right?
There's also the side of it that instills other ideas. And so sometimes someone will pose a question that will then trigger you to think about something else. And that dialogue is something that you can't do on a survey. And I think that's what we've learned a lot at the Digital Media Zone for real-time conversations. I'm going to keep going back to the breaking down the walls and putting everybody in one room. It really, we work so closely together that we'll literally hear Jonathan, if I'm sitting, and we were sitting next to each other for a while, when we were sitting next to each other, Jonathan would be talking to someone about something, and I'll happen to overhear it and go, hey, Jonathan, I know this guy. You should talk to him, and someone else will join the conversation. And that organic dialogue is, you can't do that if you don't have the mechanisms in place, and the survey just can't do that.
And on that note, Carrie-Ann, so the rumor has it that DMZ cannot function without you, and you're working with 65 companies and 300 of people on a daily basis. You're working closely and directly with a lot of young graduates and entrepreneurs on a daily basis. A lot of them are coming from the media background and from RTA and other departments across the university. What are some of the key trends and probably differences that you see in the new generation, or some people call it the Generation Y, compared to probably some of the previous experiences that you have had? Or let's say the class that you graduated from and the class that is graduating currently from RTA. What are the trends that you're seeing there now?
Something that I was actually talking to one of my other colleagues today about is how there's a generation. So there's a generation, and Dad, I'm going to pick on you. There's a generation that if they don't know or understand technology, it's okay. It's acceptable. It's fine. No problem. And then there's a generation, the generation that you're talking about, they've never known a phone that had a cable attached to it or a wire attached to it. They just don't, they don't know any different. So this function of swiping and expanding is very natural to them, the thumb generation. Then there's my generation, the generation who's in between, who looks young enough for people to assume that they know what technology is, but we didn't have computers when I was in school. Razor blade incident, situation.
With reel-to-reel film.
Yes.
Finish that phrase.
Thanks, Jamie. That's what I meant. Splicing tape. So there's this generation, Hossein, and you're part of this generation with me, where there's an assumption that they understand technology and they know how to use it, and it's ingrained in their being, when really it's not. And learning technology is embarrassing just by asking and admitting to not knowing. So what do we do about that is what is interesting to me. So being at the Digital Media Zone exposes us to this whole generation of people who are not afraid to ask, who are very curious, who want to know and are learning on their own and developing, and if they don't know, they don't care, they'll learn it, and they're willing to make mistakes. What I worry about is all the people who aren't part of that group, and how do we get those people part of it so that they can help create content and generate ideas and storytell and use technology. So my background, I'm from a very small town. And so this whole, when I'll be honest, when I was asked to be part of this panel, I thought, well, I remember learning about the convergence of media and technology in my first year. So why is this still a conversation topic that we're having? How is this not already what we're doing? Of course, I'm completely skewed because I work at the Digital Media Zone. So talk about being immersed in a world of early adopters. But the reality of it is that I was probably doing it because I was from a small town and there were 3 employees at the big company and we all had to do everything. So this whole convergence of having to be the writer and the photographer and the photo development person in the darkroom, that was just part of my being. So I kind of always lived that. And when I came to RTA, it was the same kind of idea. I could write, I could do the audio, and I could do a little bit of everything.
And your grades depended on you doing everything.
That's true. But it was very natural to me. And so this whole dichotomy or differentiation between technology and media is really intriguing to me, because for me it seems so natural for all of it to fit together. And so I would love to figure out how we make it easy for this generation who is kind of sandwiched with technology and media and help them learn it.
You touched on an interesting point there about people who straddled that generation. I mean, I remember getting my first Hotmail address, and it's a totally embarrassing one. But it was new and exciting, and instant messenger and ICQ, and I don't remember my ICQ number, but I'm sure a lot of people do. But then you're talking about that almost feeling like, oh, well, I should know this, so I feel embarrassed if I don't. But, and I'm going to point my dad out as well, is he is very adoptive of new technologies, but still some of the simple tasks aren't easy to do, and you would think it would be more intuitive that way, whereas I have my 3-year-old niece who's running amok on the iPad, knowing everything about, you know, how to intuitively work this tool. And then you have people who technically know advanced things, but can't figure out how to, you know, copy paste or something very simple that way. So we've almost leapfrogged that learning curve in terms of how we adopt and understand. And it's not even just about having the tools or having the hardware software. It's about catalyzing the frequency and using it for the right means, using it for good, let's say. You know, it's great to have a company wiki or a Facebook page or whatever, but does that serve your company? Does that serve your client? Does that serve your employees? You know, it doesn't matter if you have the tools, it's about using the tools properly and being able to engage people in that conversation and making it valuable versus just, I had toast for breakfast this morning. Like, nobody cares.
Well, the bread company might.
I guess. And it's all relative, right? So it's an interesting, I talked about that with a lot of people about how, you know, my father grew up in a generation where that just wasn't even conceivable. You know, color television came up and that was amazing to get a broadcast from across the world. And then I grew up with my ridiculous Hotmail address in high school. I got my first cell phone at 19, which was, you know, amazing. And today I have my iPhone 5 that does all these amazing things and fits my pocket computer in my, you know, it's in my pocket. I can access anything that I would otherwise from a, you know, desktop, a laptop, as our, you know, devices get smaller and smaller. So I'm not sure what the answer is. How do you make sure that people do use this technology, not just for good, but for their own advancement and for the advancement of the people around them?
I think you've raised a good point. Actually, Stephen DeCosta has actually put a tweet up regarding that on the back. Instances of stocks crashing, lies being heard due to incorrect/malicious two-way media. And we all remember, like, everybody was just scrambling and saying all kinds of stuff. Like, it's, you know, at the very least, inaccurate information, and at the very worst, like, hurtful stuff, you know, that, you know,
well,
caused a mess.
libelous material. I mean, there are lawsuits
Well,
coming on based on, you know,
constantly.
just your ability to tell everybody what you feel.
And my question is, and this, I'm glad this tweet came in, because this kind of triggers me the question. I want to put it back to storytelling for a moment. So who's telling the stories all of a sudden?
And does it matter?
What matters and who cares,
I don't
right?
know. I didn't even think of that part.
Does it matter? Because, I mean, this person is telling a story, liability and, you know, lawsuits aside.
Yeah.
But if someone is telling a legitimate story, they're telling a legitimate story.
But who designs what legitimate is? Who makes that decision?
Exactly.
Legitimate
Good
for
question.
who, by who, right?
Exactly.
We got
Yeah, a few questions,
got
yeah.
some speaker, got some microphone people.
Manny?
Yes, all right.
Oh, he's
Manny,
mic'd.
Manny, go for it.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Just wanted to see if you have any comments on the concept of play.
Yeah.
Connecting that with what you said earlier, what you started with, you basically said in the old days there used to be the experts, you know, the content creators and the tech guru heads, whatever you want to call them, and sort of trying to connect that to what Carrie-Ann was saying about this generational gap and how you feel like you're in the middle. Would the sense of play and how technology has enabled that over time, i.e., you know, if you look at 1960s, 1970s, there was no sense of play in technology.
Yeah.
And in the 80s, it was sort of a, you know, if you were a geek and, you know, you had an Apple II and you kind of wrote your own programs and you had a sense of play there. You know, 1990s, you had the Amigas and the Ataris and you start programming those and you had a sense of play there. And now it's kind of becoming almost ubiquitous that the sense of play is actually built into every single thing that we buy and every single thing that we handle, right? From the phone, you know, you said, you know, phone used to be a phone. Used to be like, you know, you picked it up for a purpose, but now you pick up the phone to play, to program, to talk, to communicate, to do everything, basically. So can you comment on that, maybe, anyone?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that really resonated with what you were saying, Manny, is that the play is sort of built in to all of our devices now. Like when we say the word play, we think, oh, I'm gonna load an app and play a game, right? But that's not what you're referring to. You're referring to play as experimentation, which I think, and I think that is where the real creative stuff comes out, and that's where the news stories get told. That's actually why I referred to that Cano $99 computer where kids are starting to create from scratch and just fool around. And the only way to have a sandbox where you've got, like people of any age, be they 9 or, I won't say 90 perhaps, but, of any age who wants to experiment, those tools are easy to use and to play with. So I think it's really interesting where we've come. We've got to the point where you talked about early personal computers. They were kind of hard to use. They were difficult. You had a big steep learning curve unless you were a computer geek. You really did get into it, like me. Like I played from the beginning because I was willing to go through that curve of learning how to use those tools. There's no reason why we can't have a sandbox on one of these things where anyone can tell a story. Where's the telling a story app? I don't mean, shooting angry birds, that's fine.
Dan, it's in the digital media zone. It's called Ping Pong Story.
Oh, okay. Oh, there you see. All right. Well, I want to just have a storytelling app where I could just mess around. That's where the play comes from.
On that note, Manny, that's very interesting because when we started working on some of the early foundations of the middleware we were building, we really had to choose and tell the industry, are we in the enterprise space, the boring legacy systems, or we are building a cool consumer product. Now if you talk to the industry, it's all about the consumerization of the IT. You want to bring the Facebook experience to the corporation and use that to make it more productive, right? You want to think about gamification. There is a very interesting company in the UK that is actually creating surveys, but you have to play a game to be able to provide that information to the retailer. You're not filling up text, you're not writing something, you're playing a game, and the retailer is going to get a very rich metadata to be able to understand their business. So it's a very exciting time because if you can bring the play world into the serious world, meaning the enterprise or even healthcare or others, I think the opportunities are massive there. So it's all about user experience. Even storytelling. So each person can start the pathway from wherever they prefer, but at the end of the day, they're going to get that collective story.
And I'm just wondering, just sort of going back to this whole play concept, how do you see that simplifying media to a point where anyone becomes a producer and the professional producer loses their jobs? I'm talking about specifically about, I think it was Chicago Tribune. They fired all their photographers or something on the staff.
Yeah.
And they said, well, just go to Flickr and just do a search for, the latest, greatest out of Egypt or something. Just type in Egypt and revolution and, a bunch of stuff will come up and we'll just use those, right? So let the crowd do the sourcing. And the professionals, well, who needs them? Right? They're just photographers at this point.
I guess it comes back to, maybe I've got my traditional hat on right now, but who are the individuals who do the final filtering? And Carrie-Ann, this brings it right back to where you said, which does it matter? Is it all just story anyway? Are we now at a point where our storytelling abilities, because our tools are, despite what I just said about the Play app, our tools are so ubiquitous that anyone can tell a story, and that's, I think what I'm finding mostly is that we're all producers. I think you actually said a moment ago, Jamie. And I think in the sense we are all producers because the tools have gotten easy enough. But it's like so much of it is LOL cats, I mean, anyone can produce that video content, like really bad cat videos. But is that quality, and who's the arbiter of the quality? And again, should they be the arbiter of quality? Maybe that's just a way of old school thinking. And maybe we just kind of say, well, the floodgates are open. The Pandora's box has been opened, and so like anything goes, and we're going to just inundate ourselves with really bad bit strips.
Well,
I don't know.
But back to another point that you were making in your question is, who's the content creator?
Yep.
And it used to be big company and big enterprise, and now it's anyone who is technology savvy. So there's still a divide. It's still not everyone who's a producer. It now eliminates a different segregation of the demography, and so you're now you know, potentially removing everyone in their 30s and 40s who's not technology savvy, or the ones who are using technology for the same reasons that, you know, 25 years ago they were reading Archie Bunkers instead of the Times, right? And so you're still going to have the really good content, and you're still going to have the comic strips or whatever it is that, you know, might not have real economic impact of sorts. And so that still exists. It's just a different way of dividing the pie.
Yeah, and just because you can doesn't mean you should. Just because we all have the opportunity to create this content doesn't mean it's valuable. Doesn't mean that, well, valuable to whoever it is. Value is very, you know, subjective. And that also rings true to aesthetic, which is something that producers or photographers or whoever is a professional would bring to that versus someone who's just got their camera taking pictures. It doesn't devalue them, but it is all about kind of adding aesthetic to it. You know, that's the difference between, you know, me writing for my high school paper and then having an actual journalist who wrote a real story and who was able to do that in a professional way. Like anybody can create content, anybody can take a picture, anybody can write a tweet, anybody can do that kind of thing. But value is only assigned when you have an audience. If you have a bullhorn and you're, you know, saying whatever you are, is it really valuable if no one's there to hear it? Yeah. Does it you know, have an impact?
Got a hand up over there. We need a microphone.
Hi. So convenient.
How handy is that?
She's just sitting right here. So in line with that, you're saying that, you know, if you have an audience, then it's fine. Well, there are people who do have quite a large audience on Twitter or on Instagram. So does that make me a professional photographer if I have a large number of followers? Because that's my audience. So am I now an expert photographer? Because look at all my meals.
No, well, I think the lines are blurred. I don't think that there's a straight, you know, I have 1 million followers and thus I am a Twitter professional. Like, I don't think that, you know, I wouldn't call, well.
Yeah, well, some will say that you then are a social media expert. that word is thrown around quite easily.
Yeah, and we can be self-appointed experts, right? I can just say that, you know, I take a picture of my toast every morning and therefore I am the bread expert, you know? But it's about assigning value, I think. I'm not saying, you know, because I take photos and I have 1 million people looking at my Instagram, I am thus a professional. But there's a niche for everything. I mean, content, no matter how mundane or bit strippy, people eat it up. And it wouldn't exist if people didn't eat it. Same as the advertising model. We wouldn't have all these crazy reality shows if there wasn't a market to sell them to, if there wasn't advertisers who are willing to want those eyeballs. We may think it's total garbage, but there was always a market for something. So I think value is assigned based on that size of market.
I think we have a question there.
Just to continue with the discussion of the audience, you know, 1 million followers on Twitter, it's still, I think while content is changing as well, and the content creators are now different people or different types of people, the audience is also different. So 1 million followers, you know, the audience could be asleep or they could be active participants in the conversation and the creation of content. And I think that kind of, perchance, adds to the paradigm as well.
This is really where interaction is critical. So back to the value, I think when value is important, but the value is only important once there's consumption of that value. And that's your point, where you can have 1 million followers, but they're all, you know, these self-generated bots or what. Yeah. And so it's I think the real value is when the consumer is utilizing that to either create more content or create further dialogue or extend the conversation or story. That's the richness of it. So 1 million users, numbers might not, you have a wider reach, of course, but it's
But numbers don't equal engagement.
No.
Right? You could just be talking to 1 million bots,
That's
like
right.
you said, versus having engagement. Like, I don't know if anybody's looked into Facebook's page analytics, but they have 2 different sides, which is reach and engagement.
Yep.
And reach is one thing to say you've touched 100 people and they have 100 people in their networks and so on and so on and so on. But engagement is the fact that someone either liked, commented, shared, whatever it is. So they've interacted with the content versus it just being there on a sticky page that, you know, nothing else happens past that.
And you brought up Twitter, so that's a good example because, if you think about an ecosystem that you have consumers of content and producers of content, the way you can use Twitter is that I can let it run and I can watch it without contributing at all. So that's how you can start with 90% audience. But if it is simple enough and it's easy enough, then after watching it and I see the value, I get motivated to contribute as well and I become a producer. So a lot of successful content framework is that they start like that. They have mechanisms to create this mass user base that you can just enjoy using it without contributing. But it creates this effect in the user that now I want to contribute. Now I want to produce content. If I produce a better content, I will get more followers. So you create these incentive models around that. On the back end, there was this article last week in Bloomberg that the sophistication behind Twitter, that's completely invisible to the user, how they model the data and how you use it for understanding trends and all that in different geographies. But all the user sees is that, oh, this is great. Companies use it for marketing purposes. I use it to, communicate with friends. Go Transit uses it to notify people on delays. But it's one way to convey that message. And on the back end, there is a whole set of algorithms making decisions, and probably that data has a lot of value. So that's a very good example of how a content framework can grow.
Charles has been itching.
Yes, I can see that.
I just have to jump in on this conversation about producers.
Okay.
I think, and I have a question too, I think we're thinking of it as being the same content. And I think what we need to realize, all of us, is that we're talking about a paradigm shift in the nature of content producing. Yep. So I'm not being an apologetic or a defender of traditional television, but television has never been stronger. There are more people watching more high-end drama than ever in the history of television. There's more money and more series being produced, linear, lean-back television. The kind of content that we're talking about, collaborative, interactive, short bits, humor, whatever, is actually a different form of content. I'm not saying that we can't use the technology to do linear content more easily, more accessibly, but it is different. And I guess just like, fine art, painting didn't disappear. It wasn't when photography was actually a different content. So I guess one of the questions I have, and maybe is not from the consumer point of view, but from being a professional creator, being an artist in the media field, being a content creator, knowing that it's computer scientists sitting with writers or whatever. How do you feel it's actually the technology is actually not just supporting it, but changing the core of what it is? What is transmedia content? It isn't just that it's available on a small set. It isn't just that people are tweeting about it. What is it that you see now and in the future that could potentially be, oh my God, this is just as different as photography is from watercolor?
Yeah. That's a very good point. I mean, and you mentioned it, probably a different type of a content. So probably the interactive discussion that we can have is that how these types of content can be complementary. So there's a lot of talks around, having a second screen. There was a survey saying, 80% of the young generation, when they are watching TV, they are also looking at their phone. So yes, it's collaborative user-generated content on the second screen, which is the phone, but it's also the main content coming from the TV. So examples you mentioned that, there is a main content being provided at an event, but also people can use a second screen. I think that could be a very good discussion point, that instead of, again, siloing them, saying this is TV content, this is user-generated content, they belong to different ecosystems, how can we bring them all together to have, again, going back to transmedia, that a user can determine which channel they want to use to get to that main story. And I don't know, would love to hear everyone's feedback and the panelists to see what they think about that.
Well, I know specifically when I worked with the Dragon's Den team, obviously Dragon's Den super popular in Canada, a model from the British version. But in order to pay for said programming with dwindling budgets from the government, we had to figure out new revenue streams, and that equaled second screen technology. That equaled play-at-home apps, which were telling you, would you invest? Do you agree with the Dragons? Whatever. Another example would be the Over the Rainbow programming, which was based entirely on audience participation, voting for who would stay. And that app actually won a lot of awards. But it's the idea of all of these, talent competitions or whatever it is, which is all based on the users providing that fodder. Are they staying? Are they going? What's the conversation on? All of those things. And it's kind of, like you mentioned, Charles, they are different, but they are also the same. One would not exist without the other. The second screen app does not exist without the original content. The Over the Rainbow app would not function without a television show to complement it. And I know that there's a lot of companies in the digital media zone that work on platforms like that. And it's all the more important, especially in the at CBC, where they are on a fixed budget, and it is very, very important to figure out new verticals and new platforms and new ways to not just generate revenue, which obviously is the bottom line to keeping the lights on, but to generate value that way and to make audiences and Canadians, especially in the remote areas. I mean, think about the analog signal being turned off. Those in remote areas have now no access to this form of media without the digital component. So now the digital component is their primary means of access to that kind of Canadian content.
Yeah, I think it's a situation that the point you're asking, Charles, and I think, Jamie, you addressed it when you talked about Dragon's Den and the second screen experience, is that I'm not so sure it changes the linear content. I don't think the tech tools, regardless of how sophisticated, well, I shouldn't speak in the future because who knows what next month will bring, but at the moment, and then we've been playing this game for a long time now, working with linear content, and not to dismiss it at all, but it's an add-on. Those extra things are add-ons, and we haven't really got to the point where we're playing with the creation of that linear content interactively as it's being created. So I don't think we've actually really explored that space a whole lot. I can't even think of an example where, say, a television program was in fact directly influenced, I should say, by an interactive element. I don't know, unless can I think of one?
The tons. I think just this morning I was reading about how the whole season of, I can't remember which show it was, and if you've heard the same broadcast, let me know. But the producers went in a completely different direction based on the interactive component and the second screen component of that show. And we also, these stories now, and again, I'm blanking on the name of it, but where you write a chapter of your book and the audience kind of tells you where they think the story should go, and then you write the next one. And I can't remember what the name of that is, but there's this whole, it needs to, and it can be, and it doesn't have to be, which is what's kind of fun right now. And I think transmedia, back to what you were saying, Charles, is we have to have it, and we don't have to have it, because you can who killed the who star? Radio killed the who star, and TV killed the which star. At this point, everything still survives in different ways, in different formats, and they can play together, they can be independent, and you ride the wave that will, back to your bottom line kind of comment, ride the wave that will best suit what you need. And the beauty of where we live today is that we can choose and select and play depending on where we want to be. I can't remember what the name of it is.
Well, it's interesting. That just made me think of Time Play. Has anybody used Time Play at the Cineplex?
Yeah.
My dad and I just went to a movie the other day, and he's like, I remember when there was no ads in front of movies. I'm like, welcome to the new generation.
I went to the movies with my dad, and he said, where's the cartoon? Sorry, Dad.
But it's also to say, but now they have an interactive app, and I can win points. I can interact with other people in the audience. I'm shooting goals with a kudo thing. And no, but it's a way to, that is a completely, an audience who was just staring at a blank screen before. Now we have advertisers in there who are paying for certain other aspects of the theater. And then you have...
Not the popcorn.
Well, most certainly not. They make the most margin on popcorn, FYI. But it's all to say it's now an interactive experience. You are formally watching content, a movie, what have you, and now you have this opportunity to interact in a way that wasn't really possible before.
But back to what Charles was saying is, during the movie, they make sure to tell you to turn your phone
Oh
off.
yes. Well,
So-
you can't
Yeah.
record, right? That's the big
And
problem.
so how do we now, where do we go from here in the sense that, well, that's great, you can kind of interact during the ad part of it or whatnot. But,
And win scene points.
and who do you work for?
Scene? Anybody?
And so how do we, the movie industry maybe hasn't figured it out yet for the actual during movie, in
Choose
movie
your own adventure movie.
Right, and so they kind of get it before and they kind of get it after, but back to what you were saying, Dan, they haven't quite figured it out yet in the real time,
Yeah.
linear sense.
That's what I was referring to. Yeah, story arcs have changed, absolutely. There's lots of shows that have really used it extremely effectively, the interactivity, to change the story arc, but it's kind of like a delayed reaction.
Yeah.
It's not like, like if 50,000 people push a button now, bam, suddenly something different on the main screen changes. And that's, I don't think we're quite there yet.
No.
Which is kind of interesting because that means that people who don't have the tools to play with the interactivity can still watch the linear show. So we're not taking away from that person's experience. They're just watching an experience that just happens to have been influenced by other people. I don't think we're quite there yet. Rob, you've got a microphone up there.
I do.
Yes.
Isn't that amazing? Sean and I think that we don't want someone in the audience pressing the button and changing the show. We want to watch the movie. But anyway, no, I have a comment or two, but I do have a question as well. Maybe I'm stepping a little bit back here, but because there's been so much stuff that's so interesting I wanted to comment on. The whole business of, that sort of group in the middle and technology and how we're all comfortable and so on. I tend not to be so worried about it myself because for a couple of reasons. One is that I think that it's always been so, I think of myself being younger and anything new that came out technology-wise, which might have even been something as simple as a tape recorder, would be something so far beyond my parents at that point in time. So it's always the same thing coming up. But I know we all think of, this concept, and I'm sure everybody here is, familiar with the concepts behind, digital natives and digital immigrants, the whole idea that, this particular generation is growing up touching it and feeling it all the time. But certainly in the educational sector, or research taking place in the educational sector, it's largely been debunked. Effectively, what we find is that certainly someone will grow up, touching a screen and having all of that interactivity and so on, but it ties back into this whole idea of who's the producer and the content creator, because as you've all said, cat videos, for example, is that really content, So clearly, just somebody doing something with it and putting it out there. I guess what I'm saying is I think there will always be two different worlds. The world of the people who are now, and that's, in my opinion, always existed. You could always go to a bulletin board somewhere and put up something you want. You didn't have to be a writer or any person who knew how to do it. You could write a letter to the editor. So I think those means of just, being the person who creates content and put it out there has always been there in some form, versus the professional communicator. So I personally think those things will always continue. Sort of coming back to the other point, the idea, again, that everybody, I think what I would say to this comment about are we embarrassed to ask these questions if we don't really know, that's probably a really important question, but it's more about the embarrassment than it is about the technology and whether or not we are actually able to learn that technology and apply that technology. Because, again, and I think those of us teaching in media, for example, we tend to have that reaction. Students coming in, for example, in the undergraduate program, they're so technologically, comfortable now, they're just automatically going to gravitate to this. But in the reality, is not the case. The reality is, no, the truth is, beyond knowing how to take a selfie and post it, edit, isn't that just when you stop it and start it and put it up online and so on and so forth. So the reality is that comfortable with technology because they've grown up with the technology, but the research kind of shows that most people will, in fact, just get to the point of what it is that they want to do. And that makes perfect sense. I think all of us have done it all the time. So the question that I have, I guess, is my question behind all of this. What does this mean for us as media educators? Because the speed and the pace. Dana just said a minute ago, well, let's wait a month and see what happens. And so the question I find that I'm sort of up against all the time is, how do we as educators in this sector meet the challenge of teaching students to enter a world that's going to move that fast, and where the skills that they're going to need probably have a lot to do with totally different things than necessarily knowing how to make a film or whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, when I was going through RTA, the speed at which technology was changing wasn't as fast as it is today. Although at that point we thought it was. The same question was being asked. Do you use SAW to edit your audio, or do you use, what Pro Tools or whatever it was that you were using? The same question was being asked, and what we soon learned within the very first few months of being an RTA was we crowdsourced the knowledge. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really, and Hossein, you do this very well, it's really important as a professor or an instructor or anyone who's in the education industry to really utilize who you have in your room to teach each other. Because you will never be able to keep up at the speed that we're going now. It's impossible. Yeah. And so I think it's important for educators to really understand that they don't know everything, to admit that, and to understand that everyone in the room will have a different level of knowledge and understanding, and to really utilize that to your advantage.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So I joined RTA about a year and a half ago, and before that I was teaching in computer science. And the challenge that I had was that every year I was seeing students that could code way better than I do, and every year that I went to the class I had challenges to keep up with the students, and some of them are here now. So kind of what we realized is that how can the role of the educator or the professor change in a way that it's becoming more like a reciprocal relationship rather than sage on stage. I can go to class, I can tell them about the models, I see what they are going to come up with and make it more collaborative. One thing we are doing at RTA is that we are bringing different programs together. So next semester there's going to be a course which is comprising of computer science, RTA, and business running in a big lecture hall. The groups will be divided in groups of 4 or 5, and of course they have labs and assignments and midterms and finals, but majority of the course management will be built around the projects that is based on the ideas and vision that the teams have. So again, what I can, my personal experience is that, as Carrie-Ann said, let's crowdsource it and let's work with the students and make it more collaborative, because especially when it comes to technology, it's very, very difficult to keep up. Mm-hmm.
I think for me being going through university and seeing technology evolve so quickly, just like every other undergrad student, they want to come out of university and know what they're going to get for a job. Like at the end of the day, it's like a tangible thing on the other side. So I walked through university trying to figure out, okay, here's a phone or an application. If we create an app that does this, can we make money off of it? Like, can we generate a business? And I think how education should shift is keeping business at the forefront of everything. Like, it shouldn't be a taboo. It shouldn't just be in business school. It should be in everything. That's how I kind of approach it all.
And technology.
Yeah. Because it was kind of like not a taboo subject. It just wasn't talked about. I was always interested if, you're a camera guy, what jobs are you going to get? Like, we all knew the standard, you'll shoot like maybe sports broadcasting or that sort of thing, but what if, like the NFL fly cams, like that's a very interesting new use and, application. So what, can we take a traditional tool and think about new ways, and then what's the business plan? More importantly, validating it very quickly. And that's what I want to see. And Charles, we had an interesting quick chat and about giving students the ability to be in a classroom and everybody's thinking collaboratively, as well as an area of interest to them, and then trying to validate the idea and doing rapid prototypes, and it doesn't mean necessarily like building it, but it's like actually mocking something up and be able to show them like a screenshot or like a couple screenshots and say, if this app, Condo Selector, if you could choose different upgradable options when you're purchasing your house and actually see what a different countertop is going to look like versus the cabinet colors, are you more likely to buy upgrades, yes or no? And if they go, oh my God, if I could actually see the gray countertop with the white cabinets in relation to the room, absolutely I'll open up my pocket and spend more.
Who builds that?
Funny you mention it, Carrie-Ann. No, but it's that sort of thing. It's like validation of ideas. That's what I'm just kind of going off on a tangent, but when I was going through school, it was always about validating in a business sense.
Well, it's interesting you talk about validation and tying into Charles's point about traditional production versus, these augmentation. We'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the next Netflix model, which started as a traditional mail order DVD system and put the Blockbuster brick and mortar stores completely out of business when they realized that they needed to provide a streaming solution. And you think about House of Cards or Lilyhammer or any of the other Netflix produced dramas that are sweeping awards, that are getting ridiculous amounts of eyeballs, not that we know how many eyeballs because they won't release it, but just to the effect that it is changing the way we consume this technology. I don't know about you, but I binge watch things. I binge watched Breaking Bad, I binge watched Game of Thrones recently, and I have that opportunity to do it with Netflix. I have my little pocket computer that I can watch on the streetcar or whatever, thanks to my 6 gig data plan, thank you. But it's all to say that the model has changed and it's adapting to the consumer's habits. Like you said, if I wanted to buy a condo and I was able to see those things as a consumer, yeah, I want to visualize it. Why can't I? And that would 100% incentivize me to purchase those things.
So if we go back to, so Jonathan, you're not a typical student in the non-business world, if you will. Right. And I think this goes back to what you were saying a bit, Charles, is how do we ensure that those who are creating the different stories or the different content or using different technology is aware that this is something that they should be thinking about? And I don't think that anyone in humanities necessarily is thinking that way, or the arts, or anything of that matter. So how do we make sure as an academic institution here at Ryerson or anywhere else, how do we make sure that we break down those silos and make them aware? And they don't necessarily have to select that route. They might say, I want to, research for the rest of my life, or I might want to do whatever it is that they might want to do, and that's fine too. But if they're not aware that that's a component that could be a job creator or an end game, it's unknown to them. So we as an academic institution, back to kind of the original question on, as an educator, what do I do? Yeah. Well, this is part of what you do. You expose them to the different silos that traditionally they wouldn't necessarily cross-pollinate with.
So you don't teach tools necessarily, although obviously you have to teach tools to do creative work and make productions happen to get experienced with that. But it's not about the tools at all, unlike the scenario I started with when we started this talk this evening, which was the tools were very finite. Here's your tools, figure them out. And don't teach the tools, but teach the creative process, whether it's linear storytelling or nonlinear storytelling, we refer to that way. Include the business element into it, and include all, I started off when I said there were 2 groups at the table, the creatives and the technologists. There's more than 2 groups at the table now. Now there's like 8 or 9 different groups. And teaching students that that's the variability that's out there and how all of those people have to collaborate together is maybe where you get to, keeping up with educational, how will you do pedagogically?
A great example of this, Dana, is when we were working with engineering students, aerospace engineering students, and they were saying, we know how to create the engines and the turbines and we know how all the anti-gravitational, don't ask me this stuff, all that great stuff. And one of the things that they did not think about, and this goes back to user experience and to the design, what they realized at the end of this game was they needed someone from fashion and interior design. They needed to understand that the seats needed to be a material that wouldn't absorb sweat and stink and would last long and would be colors that would be soothing. and they needed to bring in the interior design and those fashion students in to really understand textile and body shape and ergonomics. And so again, you know, aerospace and, you know, that industry, you wouldn't necessarily think about bringing those folks in. That's what this new realm of education is going to look like, has to look like.
Oh, we got it. Yes, go for it.
I know it's fairly late, so
Okay.
I just want to quickly go back to Carrie-Ann's point about the sandwich generation. And unfortunately or fortunately, I am part of that generation. And there's pressure from Hossein, but I have very little interest in using the technology, or he's probably...
Farnak, for everybody's knowledge, Farnak is Hossein's wife.
He's probably embarrassed for me,
Full disclosure.
but there's pressure. I just want to quickly know what you think about people like me who have either little interest or they're scared of using new technology, they're not very savvy, whether we or I am going to miss the boat, and whether I already have missed the boat, or what happens if I don't do any of this and don't become familiar with all of this.
My God, if I had the answer to that question, I'd be really rich. But I think what's important is that you're not the problem, we're the problem.
Yeah.
We're the people who are kind of running 100 kilometers an hour or whatever's fast, and we're the ones who are not thinking about who we're leaving behind or how the conversations. And I'm sitting up here, I'm seeing us throw terms around, and I'm going, my dad is going to ask me later what the heck that meant, and it's our fault that we're doing this and we're isolating our peers. I mean, we're the same age, I know that, and so how do we make sure that we're not isolating? And that goes back to who are the producers of the content? Well, it's the people who have the keyboards, it's the people who have the dissemination of technology capabilities. So how do we make sure that we make it even easier and less daunting for everyone to be on the boat?
Well, to take it back, way back, I mean, we all remember the medium is the message, right? Do we believe that? Does that still exist? Is it still relevant? Personally, yeah, I think it is. I think dissemination of content is very much dependent on the platform with which you consume it and who it is that's either contributing to it, who's absorbing it, or who's interpreting it. Because, interpretation is something that we didn't really touch on, but it can mean different things to different people. And Carrie-Ann, like you said, we're running at a mile a minute, and we're doing all this, and I can't imagine any other way, quite frankly. I can't imagine staying kind of behind the curve. I mean, just for me and my personality, that's just what I'm used to, and I would feel, that I was, not living up to the potential of all of these tools in front of me.
I think it's okay to stay behind the curve, though. I really do. I mean, I'm like you. Yeah, of course, I'm always, like early adopter of everything. But I think it's really okay because I think what ends up happening, there's kind of like a long tail of technology use, I guess, in a weird way of using that term. Because what you end up having with, like, computers were originally hard to use, as Manny pointed out earlier. And now they're, well, if you call that a computer, and I think that it is, it's much easier to use those tools now. So now a lot more people can get access to things, to information, I'll call it that, versus content or storytelling necessarily, than could before. So that's just an evolutionary thing. My parents are never going to figure this thing out, because they're like 90, right? So it's not going to happen. But that's okay. I don't have a problem with that. They know how to run a television set. And they're extremely, in fact, perfectly happy with that. They do not have the internet, nor do they have any interest in having the internet. And that's perfectly acceptable. I don't think that's a problem. So I think that we've been talking about the gap group in the middle and all the rest. As our tools become more easy to operate, it goes right back to ease of use of the tools, right where we started again. As those tools become more easy to use, then those people will pick it up and run with it. The reason that you don't have adoption of media is because the tools to grab that media are not easy to run. And you said it best, Carrie-Ann, that's our problem. That's our problem. And our problem is tool developers, and as storytellers, obviously, as well, but certainly as tool developers. I think that's why all the tool developer table has to be large again, and not just engineers and technologists.
That's right.
Medium
Absolutely.
interpretation, and I think context is also very important. One thing we are seeing, let's say in the education sector, everybody is talking about these MOOCs and online classes because they're thinking this is going to completely change and replace the classroom. Whereas I think if we really bring context to the content world, probably students want to see a different type of a content on their mobile phone compared to their laptop, compared to the TV. And if you bring that transmedia concept even into the education sector, to the TV world, to the advertisement, that can also play an important role. That depending on the medium that I use, depending on the context that is surrounding me, such as my calendar, my bandwidth to the network and all that, I may get a very different content. So that's also, I think context will also play an important role in making content more viral and interesting.
I think what's happening is absolutely people just want to consume it on very different things, and as content producers, it's giving people the ability to watch it on a TV screen, on a computer, tablet, phone, whatever it may be. So you have to cater to that wide expectation. I remember we were talking years ago about like augmented reality, and Don's leaving, but his idea about, I don't want to go to a movie theater and the story to change dictated off the audio. I want to sit back and I want to watch. And I'm I'm in the same boat. Like, I want to not actually think. I just want it to be fed to me. But at the same time, people want that experience. And I think we were talking something about an augmented reality experience for hockey, where you would put up your phone and you could, if a goal happens, you could see like the replay in real time, or you could pull up stats. And I got thinking...
The replay in real time?
No, sorry, the replay after the fact, sorry. But the whole idea was, like, I was thinking in my head, I don't see any time soon where people are going to the ACC, spending $200 a ticket, and going like this, having a phone in front of them.
I don't know, they do it at concerts.
I just don't see it. But what they're doing, they're taking pictures, of course, right, and posting it. That's right.
I've got the app.
However, some people might want to be able to stick up their phone and like take a picture of Fanuff and get like his stats or whatever it may be. Yeah. So it's like having the tools available to people who might want that, and that's what's kind of interesting. It's servicing so many needs, and that's what technology has opened up. Is different needs and expectations. I think
this is becoming a very interesting conversation, and I know we are running out of time, but we have two questions, so maybe we can start with Sal, and then
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy you brought up the subject of Marshall McLuhan. One of my many interests is
one person.
Marshall McLuhan, and I'm part of the McLuhan Legacy Network. But in 1971, Marshall McLuhan was videotaped here at Ryerson on our closed-circuit television station. And he said some very prolific things that you've all said. And he said this in 1971, that watching television, you become a producer yourself just by virtue of learning about how the production goes on just from watching it. But also, he also said we form our tools like computers and television shows, and then our tools form us. They affect us very much. So, and I can see how the way computers are formed dictate how we organize our thoughts. We become the machines.
Well, even think about Google Glass and how that's become completely integrated, to Benito Carne's point. And that's how we were talking about how to integrate with movies if you wanted to. I agree. I want to turn my brain off and just get entertained by a story. But let's say you had Google Glass on while you're watching the movie. You can get, the IMDb backgrounds, what have you. That's a way to interact with that screen.
Cool. Thank you.
And one of the very interesting, I'm sorry, just to finish off, one of the very interesting things he said was that as instructors or people directing other people's knowledge, we should, more importantly, work from our ignorance. We should admit what we don't know. He said that becomes the privilege for students to understand that the professional world knows a whole lot less than they know about any subject. We know nearly nothing about cancer research, and so just admitting what you don't know and telling your students will cause some of the students who sometimes have more experience than you do in any field, and he said all this, he said they'll come up with the answers, and the things will blow you away, just how much they do know, and everyone will be richer for it.
Absolutely.
Rob?
I'm so glad you were talking about Marshall McLuhan there, and I can't help but thinking about that little 3D film you made just a little while ago with the scene from Annie Hall with Marshall McLuhan in it. But anyway, this will be really brief. I had to jump in again after Dana made the comment about, you know, his mother couldn't operate the iPad. My mother's 97. She can operate the iPad. She goes, I get emails from her, and
wow.
she, you know, when my dad was ill, she went on Google to find out what the problem that he was having, went to the doctor, and the doctor said, yeah, that's right. So anyway, I'm just sort of reinforcing that point once again. I guess this comes back to the question of being scared about being in the sandwich generation, that really, you know, all we need to do is do what that younger generation is doing, which is ask someone else in the cohort, you know. It's really all about that. There's no sort of big mystery, in my opinion. That is basically how that cohort learns. They've grown up with it. Yes, it's true, but it's always been that schoolyard, hey, want to see something neat? Yeah, look at this, ba-da-da-da-da. So I think we just have to grab that. I think that, I think we can put that fear aside about our ability to jump on this technology bandwagon and really understand how to integrate it with media and business and so on.
Well, and at the, you know, maybe in closing, if you will, at the Digital Media Zone, I think that's what we pride ourselves in doing the most, is fostering an environment that is safe to ask that freely without being judged. That's what I think educators can do now, and that's really what the Digital Media Zone is all about.
Any concluding remarks from you, Jonathan, Jamie?
Thank you to everybody for contributing to the conversation. That's really the only closing I have. Please continue to be curious about what's coming. No, I mean, without curiosity, we would have no innovation. So curiosity is the fuel of this whole discussion. So thanks for being a part of it.
I think for me, yes, thank you everybody, of course. But I think Ryerson set out with a very interesting model, and what attracted me to RTA is profs are like mentors. They've been in the business, and I have succeeded because of mentors. People, you can't go through life and I mean, sure, you want to experience it all yourself, but there's other people that have been there, done that. So why don't you reach out to them? And that's what's been really exciting for RTA, is that they've been in the business. They can see the landscape. They can help correlate that to you, as well as, more importantly, taking you out on trips like the NAB. That changed my life, actually, because I got to see what ABC, Sony, all these people were doing in Vegas, where the technology was at, was it 2009, I guess. And that just opened up the doors, for ideation. So, I'm excited to see where RTA School of Media is going, and I think they're going to foster the people, hopefully like me, is all about.
Yeah, it has been a fantastic conversation. I personally truly enjoyed it. I mean, example that I want to emphasize is that it was that RTA program 11 years ago that really helped me to shape my career, that really allowed me to work with media and creative people and bring the computer science background to that world. And I think to brag a little bit about my home department is that RTA is now taking that leadership to really create and form the new generation of graduates who can speak technology, who can be expert in media, who can understand the business components. And by the time that they graduate, they are ready to either start their own company or join a very prominent company and then prove their metrics. So it has been great talking to you all, and please let the tweets come, and let's continue the conversation.
And I'd like to thank our special presenters for joining us here tonight, Jonathan, Carrie-Ann, and Jamie. One of the nice things is they're all RTA grads. They're perfect examples of how people who got into our program and dug in with their heels and everything else, and then they went off and did all these interesting, fascinating things. They really are the leading edge. I mean, the tools are becoming easier to use. I think we're establishing that. The consumers, I hope, are getting a little more savvy, but without people who can kind of think that way, then and get more people involved, like I say, at both ends of the stream. And I think one of the questions that still remains, I said we're going to have answers and questions to the end. One of the questions is, I don't think we really quite know where storytelling is going with all of this. You know, that's one thing we can kind of say for certain, because that landscape's constantly changing. But the name of the game is to be nimble. So once again, I would like very much to thank our panelists for joining us here this evening. And thank you all very much for coming out tonight and then staying with us and giving us your feedback and thoughts. Much appreciated. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.